So I understand that you are in the middle of a sermon series on the book of Job. I understand that Pastor Anna, introduced you to this just and faithful man last week. For many of you, I wonder if this was the first time that you had made acquaintance with Job. Was that the first time for anyone to have met Job last weekend? It's not a book that we tend to read very often in church. I can remember the first time that I met Job. I first became acquainted with him as a very young child, long before I ever opened a Bible or had it opened for me. I remember hearing about this man Job from my grandmother. She tended to mention this fellow quite often. When my mother would ask my grandmother about her neighbor, Mary, and how Mary was faring, my grandmother would list all of the trials and tribulations that Mary was facing, and then my grandmother would sigh deeply and say, "But God bless her, she has the patience of Job. She never complains at all." Or when my grandmother would be asked about how her church work was going, she would talk about all the ways that the people were not following through on what they were supposed to be doing, and how her best friend, who was head of the fundraising committee, had to pick up all the slack. And she would say, "But you know what? I never hear him speak a bad word about anyone. He has the patience of Job." This man Job and his incredible, seeming otherworldly patience baffled my young mind. It was not lost on me that having the patience of Job was the highest compliment that my grandmother could pay to anyone. My stoic Scandinavian grandmother prided the steely and steadiness of character. The patience of Job for her meant no complaining, no making a fuss, no drawing attention to oneself, regardless of what one may be feeling. To have the patience of Job is to suffer silently. I learned at an early age that having this patience of Job is what makes somebody a good and faithful person. Patience was a virtue, and Job had patience, so clearly Job was a righteous man who was good with God. Despite all that he may be going through, or Mary, or the chairman of the fundraising committee, or whatever I might be going through, I was taught that a person of faith was not to complain and was to bear up with patience whatever it is that he or she may be facing. Did anybody else grow up with that kind of a portrait of what a faithful person looks like? Now, let's be clear. There is nothing wrong with being patient. And let's be clear that generally not complaining is kind of a more gracious way to go through life. But it turns out that patience and complaining are not markers of what a faithful life looks like. It was not until I was in seminary, in fact, when I met Job for myself for the very first time. I took a class on the book of Job, and when I opened the text and started reading the words, I was shocked. Job is not how my grandmother described him at all. Job is far different than the model of faith that I had been taught. I have no idea actually where this aphorism, the patience of Job, may have come from, but I clearly know it did not come from Job himself. Are you a little bit rattled by our scripture this morning? Listen again to what it says. "Today my complaint is bitter. His hand is heavy upon me despite my groaning. Oh, that I knew where I might find him, that I might come even to his dwelling silently suffer? Is he stoic? No, not at all. He speaks up. He complains. This paradigm of righteousness, it turns out that he has no trouble protesting the injustice that he is suffering. Turns out, in fact, that doing so is exactly what faith looks like. At least according to the Jewish spiritual tradition out of which the book of Job arises. It turns out that arguing, wrestling, is a very story in the book of Genesis where Cain wrestles with an angel all night long. Wrestling and wrestling with this visitor. Wrestling, he is so tenacious, he will not let go until in the morning when the sun rises, the angel gives Jacob a blessing and says, "You are now Israel," which means the one who wrestles with God. As Pastor Anna mentioned last week, it is this wrestling that is at the heart of the book of Job. Job wrestles in the book because the purpose of the book itself is to wrestle with some prevailing theology of the day. And this theology that the book of Job wrestles with is this idea that good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. So if something is good is happening to somebody, you can be assured that person is good. And if something bad is happening to somebody, you should be assured that that person is bad. That was the prevailing theology of the day. That is the theology that the book of Job is wrestling with. Now, Job, as you heard last week, loses everything. He loses his family, he loses his fortunes, he loses even his good health. And he does not know why. And his friends come and they try to comfort him, but they are stuck within this theology and they're like, "Job, I'm sorry, but you must have done something wrong because clearly all of this catastrophe wouldn't have happened to you if you really were the righteous and just man that you say you are." They cannot wrap their minds around the idea that the box that they're living within may be limiting and that they may not be able to see what it is that is starting to wrestle and break loose. They're stuck in that prevailing theology. But not Job. Job will have nothing to do with their easy answers. The book of Job wrestles those easy answers to the ground and lifts up in place this radical notion that faith is not evidenced by the fact that everything is going well in your life. Faith instead is evidenced by one's ability to be able to really wrestle with the hard stuff. To hang in there so that something new may break forth, so that a new name may be given, a new way forward may be revealed, or greater understanding arise. I wonder how this new paradigm of faithfulness could look like in our lives right now and in the life of the world today. What would it look like to really wrestle with those voices inside of our own hearts and minds that may be keeping us small, shutting us down, shutting us away from the fuller expression of who God has created us to be? What would it really look like to wrestle with the issues of our world that are keeping creation and so many of God's children from wholeness of thriving? What would it look like to dismantle easy answers and instead hang in there together until new insights and new opportunities could begin to emerge? There's more in this book, more in our passage together this morning. What is so powerful for me about our passage is not just that Job complains and wrestles, but what is revelatory to me is actually what he complains about. In our passage, the heart of the matter, Job's biggest complaint is not the fact that he suffered. Instead, his biggest complaint is that God does not seem to be anywhere around. The relationship is the crux of the matter for Job. Job is furious, not with the suffering he's going through, but with God's seemingly absence. The abdication of God, keeping up God's end of the covenant. That is what is intolerable to Job. In this way, we see how God has indeed gotten it right with Job. Job is indeed a righteous man. He is faithful. He knows how important it is to show up for each other. And he is unafraid to tell God that God needs to show up as well. The revelation at the heart of the book of Job is that faithfulness is revealed not in everything going right for one, but faithfulness is revealed in the quality of relationship. Job's insistence on the sacredness of his relationship with God becomes the new paradigm through which faithfulness comes into view. I mentioned earlier that Job's friends try as they might trying to comfort Job, they get it wrong. His friends are so wedded, I think, to the formula they had been living within and the meaning that they were trying to make that they couldn't see anything beyond that. They try to show up for Job, but they fail. This, too, is something that we need to wrestle with, right? We as church are called to show up for our siblings of faith in this building and beyond. We are called to come alongside those who are wrestling and suffering. We are called to come alongside this beautiful creation of ours. And maybe most that we can do is come alongside not with easy answers or solutions based on what has been, but with the attentiveness of love, so that what is waiting to emerge can. Now, as it turns out, God has, in fact, not gone far away at all. Turns out that even while Job could not see it, God has been with Job this whole time. And at the point in the book, which is a few chapters forward from where we are today, when God chooses to make God's presence known to Job, God shows up, not with explanations, but instead with an invitation. Wrestle with me, yes, says God. And then join me, says God, on what my Hebrew Bible professor called a magic carpet ride of the universe. Join me, says God, as he takes Job across the face of creation and the cosmos, showing the grandeur and the beauty of all that is. And then God asks Job the question, where were you, Job? Where were you? Job, have you been paying attention to all of the wonder and awe around you? Have you been seeing where it is that I have been moving? Or have you too been locked in your own limitations of perspective, being consumed by the particularities of your own life? Job is invited into awe. So as a final word, may God bless and keep my sweet, sweet grandmother. But I am afraid from here on out, I am going to strike the aphorism, the patience of Job, from my personal lexicon. Instead, I am going to take away from the hearing of this word and scripture these 3 points. The first is being faithful includes wrestling. In fact, wrestling may be more faithful than quietly acquiescing to how things are or conforming to old patterns that no longer serve. 2, faith is marked not by everything going well in one's life. Instead, faith is marked by relationships that look like showing up for each other and showing up for God. And 3, God is with us, and with each strength to face whatever challenges come our way. And even in the midst of those challenges, we'll find wonder, awe, and the magnificence of our God. So I wonder in this week ahead, how might we apply these learnings? What might faith call us to reckon with this week? What may you be called to wrestle with? How might we faithfully show up for another person, not to fix or to solve with easy answers, but to come alongside them in the midst of their struggling, to witness to what might be emerging? And finally, how might we listen for the ways that God may be calling us to join God on that magic carpet ride, so that we too may experience the awe and majesty of God. And through it all, may we be held fast by the steadfast love of God that is the connective tissue of the universe, binding us one to another and to God in this moment, the next, and the next. Thanks be to God.